Okay, so we're going to take a look at the copy rotation constraint when working with bounds. So let's go ahead and press the 7 key to go to the top view and do Shift C to place the 3D cursor in the center and go ahead and zoom in a bit. Now we're going to put this bone a little closer to this. So go ahead and switch to edit mode on your armature and make sure that when you select the bone, the entire bone highlights. Now go ahead and click on this red arrow and just bring it right about here. Now we need to change the bone roll, basically point the axis in a different direction so nothing is aligned with each other. Otherwise it's difficult to understand this. So go ahead and click on bone roll, and here I'm just going to roll it like around here. That's fine. Now we're going to go ahead and do the same thing on this bone. Click it, make sure it highlights the entire bone. And over here, let's just click on the bone roll, and we're going to position it kind of like this over here, pointing in this direction. Now go ahead and switch back to pose mode. Now click on this grid and turn this on and this on. Do Control A and do visual transform. Now turn it off and the grid should not move. Now click on this grid and press H to hide it. We're only interested in the local axis over here. Go ahead and do the same thing on this. We're going to go ahead and turn this on and this on. Do Control A. We're going to do visual transform and go ahead and now turn this off. Now go ahead and click the grid and press the H key to hide it. Now I'm going to zoom out a bit. Okay, so when you click on this bone, you should be able to see the white X and Z axis on both of them, right? They're going to match right now the local axis that is being displayed over here. Now remember, this axis that is being displayed is actually coming from edit mode on the bone itself. Okay, so what we need to do now is we're just going to switch to pose mode over here. Now we need to actually click on the armature and switch to object mode and get this axis and place it where the bone is. So to do this, we first have to switch to pose mode, click on this bone, do Shift S and do cursor to select it. Now you know that when you do this, the 3D cursor is going to go to the head of this bone. I'm going to zoom in. Okay, now we're going to do Shift. Actually, we have to switch to object mode, do Shift A and go to empty, and here we're just going to add arrows. Okay, now we have to click on this, press the Shift key down, and here in the outliner I'm just going to click on the armature and go under object, do transforms and do align to transform orientation. Okay, so now go ahead and click this. So this is going to be aligned with the armature object itself, meaning that this is pose space and this over here is local space. So let's click this and press the S key to just make it a little bigger. Now since we already have this, we can just do Shift D and duplicate it. Now we have to click on the armature and make sure that it is in pose mode. Click on this bone, do Shift S, do cursor to select it. Now click on this, do Shift S and do selection to cursor. Okay, now the last thing we need to get is actually the global coordinate system. So here we're just going to do Shift D, right click to cancel and do Alt R. Okay, do the same thing over here, do Shift D, right click to cancel and do Alt R to reset the rotation. So I'm going to go ahead and now show you that it's actually pretty simple as to what's going on, right? This we know is the global coordinate system. This we know is pose space because it's matching this, right? So this is the global axis, the world axis. This is the pose space axis, and this is the local space axis. Okay, so over here, this is the world space axis, this is the pose space axis, and in this case, this is the local axis. Now over here, let's do File and Save. Okay, so what we're going to do first is go ahead and click on this axis that represents the bone axis, its local coordinate system, when it is in edit mode. Okay, so go ahead and switch this back to pose and click on this axis. So what we're going to do is go over here all the way down and click on the plus sign. Make sure that it says local. Now go over here and switch this to empty.001 or whatever it is for you. Go ahead and scroll down, click over here, and we're going to say that this is the bone local edit. Okay, now go ahead and switch this to local space. Now go ahead and click on this bone. Now what we need to do is press the R key and actually rotate this bone at least somewhere like this, so it's not aligned to this. Okay, now what we're going to do is click on this bone, go to the bone constraints and remove the location, and over here we want to do copy rotation. Click on the armature and copy the rotation of bone.001. Now first I'm going to point something out here. It doesn't matter if you select world, pose, local on the target or on the owner. When we click on this bone and do the middle mouse button, if we want to rotate this bone on the axis that is being displayed on the tail, we just have to make sure that this is on local. So when we press the R key and press the X key 2 times, we are rotating on the local axis that is being displayed on the tail of this bone in pose mode. So notice that when we do this, this bone is going to do the same exact thing on itself. So if we click this, press the R key, press the Z key, it's going to do the same thing. And if we press the R key, press the Y key 2 times, it's going to do the same thing. So this is an obvious concept. So we're not going to be looking at this when we are understanding world space, pose space, and local space, because you know how that's going to work every time. So just press the 7 key to go to your top view. Now notice over here that when we click on this bone and choose a local space, this is talking about the axis that is being displayed on the tail. Okay, it's not talking about this axis. We can only get to that with our custom transform orientation. That's what that's for. See? Okay, so anyways, switch to local space. So having this selected, you can see that when we are dealing with world space, how is this object looking at the target in itself? Now this is actually very simple to understand. I'm going to do shift middle mouse button to pan over here. So here we're going to go to the grease pencil and draw a line to match the world space y-axis, and do the same thing over here, right? So this bone is going to look at this bone using the world space coordinates to match the rotation that this bone has. So here, if we press the escape key, click on this bone, you can see that where the z-axis is pointing. So here we're going to click on a line and draw a line from the center just to see where this is going, just like this. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing on this bone. So here we can see that it's going to do the same exact thing, right? So you can see that the orientation angle is exactly the same. So of course when you press the R key, it's just going to do the same thing. So this is how we're going to understand world space, right? That's all the copy rotation constraint is doing. It's looking at how we are evaluating this bone in the coordinate system, and it's going to position itself according to how it looks at it. So this is a very obvious concept. So let's go over here and actually remove this grease pencil. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at this bone in pose space. Okay, going to click it. So now when we're evaluating this bone in pose space, we know it's going to be about this angle. So let's go ahead and go to line and draw a line along the y-axis, just like this. And over here, we're still evaluating this in world space. So we know that we're going to be drawing a line on the y. Press the escape key. Now if we take a look at this bones Z, where it's going, right, we're going to draw a line on the Z, which is going to be like this. Press the escape key, click on this bone. Now you can see that the Z is pointing this way. So we're going to draw a line on its Z that it's showing on the tail of this bone. And you'll see that we get, again, that same distance between them. That's how that's working. So let's go ahead and now remove the grease pencil. And now let's go ahead and flip this, right? So here we're going to say world space, and now we're going to do pose space. So we're evaluating this in world space. So we're going to do the same thing. Click on a line, draw a line on the y-axis, and again, just draw a line on Z. Now here we're evaluating this bone in pose space. So this means that we have to draw a line on the y-axis for pose space and draw a line on Z. Right? So you see that it's the same thing. Press the escape key. Go ahead and now just remove the grease pencil. So you can see that it's very obvious how that's working. Now, of course, when we do pose space in pose space, it works just like it does in world space, right? We don't even have to draw the grease pencil because we can see that however this bone orientation is, it's going to do the same thing because it's just being evaluated in pose space. So it works just like world space, right? There's nothing really to look at here. Okay, so now what we're going to do is switch this to local space and switch this to local space. Now, when we are looking at this bone in a local space, if we click it, the local space axis for this bone is going to be this axis over here. So in this case, we're going to have to draw a line across the X. We're just drawing it. We could have done it on the Z, it doesn't actually matter. Press the escape key, click on this bone, and let's take a look at where the Z is going. So that's where the Z is going, over here, like this, okay? Now, if we click on this bone, let's take a look at where its local is. So this is going to be its local. So we had drawn a line on the X. So we're going to draw a line over here along the X on this one, okay? With the escape key, and then click on this bone, and you can see that the Z is pointing this way. We're just going to draw a line on the Z. See? So get the same idea here. Press the escape key. Now go ahead and remove this grease pencil. Okay, so we've seen world space and world space, and we saw pose space and pose space. We saw pose space in world space, and we saw pose space in a world space, right? All that made sense. Now we're going to take a look at, okay, let's switch this to world space, and here we're going to now take a look at this in local space, okay? Now, first we need to understand what's actually going on over here. So the way this is going to work is basically, if you think about it, if you look at this bone, right, if you actually click on this axis, you can see that the Z is pointing up because this is the world space coordinate system. If you look at this bone, look at where the tail is. It's pointing up on the Z. So if you look at this bone, which is being evaluated in local space, you can see that its tail is going to point on a Z. That's what's going on. Right, so if we click on this bone, press the R key, press the Z key to rotate on Z, that bone, of course, is going to rotate on the Z. Now, if we press the R key, press the X key to rotate on X, that bone is going to rotate around X, right? Meaning this X over here, and this is Y. So when we click on this bone, press the R key, press the Y key, if we rotate around Y, that is going to rotate around Y because the Y for it is pointing up. Very simple concept there. Now over here, we're going to flip this. We're going to say, okay, local space and a world space. Now over here, let's take a look at what's going on. So here we're saying that we want to evaluate this bone in its local space, okay? So if we click on this, you can see that the Y is pointing up over here. Now if we look at this bone, which is being evaluated in world space, you can see that the tail of this bone is going towards Y, right? So if we click on this bone and press the R key and press the Y key 2 times to rotate around Y, it will rotate around Y, right? Now, of course, we have to switch this to bone local edit, okay? Because that's what we want to look at. So it's going to be the same thing. Press the R key, press the Y key 2 times. Now, when we press the R key, press the X key 2 times, we are rotating around the local coordinate system that's coming from the bone's edit mode. So you can see that when we rotate this on X, this bone is going to rotate around its X. If we click on this, press the R key, press the Z key 2 times, you're rotating around the local Z, which is coming from edit mode, and this bone was doing the same thing, right? It's going to rotate around a Z this way. Okay, so all of that is very straightforward. Now over here, what we're going to do is say that, okay, we've looked at local space and local space, and here we've looked at local and world. So now we're going to just switch this to pose, and you'll see that it's just going to go to the Y on pose. Same exact concept, right? Press the R key, press the Y key. If we rotate around Y, that's going to rotate around Y. If we press the R key, press the X key on this, rotate around X, it's going to rotate around X, meaning this X over here. And of course, if we press the R key, press the Z key to rotate around a Z, if you click this, you'll see that the Z is pointing up, so that's why it's rotating around it. Right, so now if we do pose and local, you can see that it's just doing the same thing again, right? So in pose space, if we look at this, you can see that the Z is pointing up. This is the pose space, so it's doing the same thing. It's going to point over here. Okay, so pose space over here, we would switch to pose. Now if we press the R key, press the Z key 2 times, we're rotating on the Z. Press the R key, press the X key on the pose space axis. If this is going to rotate around X, right, this is going to rotate around X. Press the R key, press the Y key 2 times. If we rotate around Y, this bone is going to rotate around Y. That is looking at over here. Okay? And that's really it. Right? So you can switch between these concepts and see that they're always going to make sense, right? So when we do world and world, now we can just visually stare at it, right? That makes sense. Now when we do world and pose, this makes sense. Now when we do world and local, that makes sense. Now if we switch it backwards, do world and world, that makes sense. World, pose and world, that makes sense. And local space and world space. Okay, so what I want you to do is go ahead and do File, do Save As, and save this as a Bone Concepts 11.blend. So I'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you.